Hello, everyone. My name is Gert, and on behalf of the Foundation for the Conservation of Atlantic Salmon, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. This series is made possible in part thanks to the contribution of the Government of Canada. For today's webinar, we're very pleased to be hosting Myron King. Myron is currently a PhD candidate at the Hull International Fisheries Institute at the University of Hull in the United Kingdom, where he's pursuing his PhD in fisheries under the supervision of Dr. Ian Cowkes, who is in Hull, UK, and Dr. Michael van Zildjian at UNB. Myron is examining policy framework and design processes along with extensive GIS to develop a special river management tool set to improve fish passage barrier removal decisions and also reduce cumulative effects of hydrodams on riparian ecosystems. Myron is currently a policy analyst and researcher at the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador, and has had many years of experience in academic and technology sectors. He enjoys fishing and hunting and spending time with his family and cats. Today, he will be speaking on assessing the impact of instream barriers and climate change on wild Atlantic salmon population persistence and production in forested boreal watersheds. After this afternoon's presentation, we'll be opening the floor for questions and answers. Now I'll turn the webinar over to Myron. Welcome, Myron.
Thank you, Gert. Hi, everyone. My name is Myron King, as Gert mentioned, and today we're going to talk about barriers and climate change. And I've been doing my PhD in covering this project for several years now, a few years, and it's very interesting, and I want to describe it to you and we'll do some questions afterwards. So the title, as Gert mentioned, Assessing the Impact of In-Stream Barriers and Climate Change on Salmon in Forested Boreal Watersheds. And it's a great project I find that I'm doing, and I hope you are taking this in well as we go. So let's get started right away. Today we're going to talk about barriers and climate change under the context of the problems, the project goals, what we need, and a tool that we've created to look at barriers. And we did a couple of case studies, so I'll go through them as well. And we created something called a DCAT as a part of the main tool, our PAT. And then we'll have a summary and some acknowledgements at the end. So what are barriers? What's the problem going on here? Stream barriers, they're obstructions and impediments that alter the natural flow of water. So, you know, they're your general culverts, usually disrepaired culverts, poorly designed ones. They could be hydrodams, weirs, anything in particular where there's actually a crossing over a river, when you think of it that way. And there could be natural obstructions as well that build up over time. Where do we find the barriers? So as I said, they're at crossings, they're at residential roads. Hydrodams are a large source of barriers sometimes, and other crossings as well, such as old forestry roads and access roads or trailways that we like to walk through the woods. And some of these, you know, they're very old roads and access ways sometimes that we might forget about. And they turn into barriers by breaking down and maybe falling into the river, where they affect the swimming of fish, the migration of salmon up through the rivers, and halted in many cases. How do we find them? So if we're looking for them, we're out looking for them. We could walk up a river and find them, as noted here. Also, we have a special way now with technology to look for them using geographical information systems. So by using GIS, we can examine where, for instance, roads and rivers meet, and that becomes a point that can be studied under GIS and examined and considered a potential barrier, where a barrier is likely to be, and you can ground truth that and go out and see that that's for sure, but there's a certain probability that some of those points where rivers and roads cross will be barriers. And of course, there might be dams and hydro stations that tend to be locations to find barriers as well. So these potential barriers, they have impacts on us, and we hear about this on rivers around the world, and it's really bad for fish. So there's an impact to fish migration. There's a reduction in non-migratory fish populations because their habitat is lost, and loss of habitat means they can't even go up there in the rivers to spawn. So these things are unsettling at best, and we're really causing damage to some species. Damage due to the effects of climate change is also occurring, so that actually increases some of the disrepair or trouble that is being caused by some of these broken down culverts and areas. They're actually accelerating through climate change in their breaking down. We have regulated or altered flow regimes caused by potential barriers, and hydrogeomorphical processes are also altered, and that's all trouble sources for that we'd have to deal with in order to fix the migration pathways for salmon. Continuing, what else do they affect? So with these impacts, barrier restoration decisions has often been based on visual assessment. If we want to find them, we find them, but how far can we actually walk and look through an entire region, a large region, for finding these? It's a bit difficult, right? We've often done that in the past, where you might walk certain routes and find some of the barriers, but covering a large scale area, large distance, is really difficult. So GIS helps with that, but the legacy way of finding them here and dealing with them is what is actually within sight. So in the diagram here, what I painted a picture of is your typical community area, maybe with a watershed that flows through it, with a few rivers flowing through the community. The gray roads are the community area here. And what we've been dealing with for many, many years is circled in green. So we might assess a small area and be able to address some of the barriers at crossings that need restoration, and but many more lie outside an area like that we're not getting to. So that's a bit of picture into the reason why there's a big problem with potential barriers. So the result really is many barriers continue to impact fish and the ecosystem function. So my project goals, developed with my supervisors, Ian and Mike, was to develop a spatial data inventory of the parameters. So first we had to get something in place that help us look at the problem and see what it is we got. We needed some data to be able to examine and understand certain variables and what's going on in these areas where there's potential barriers. We wanted to demonstrate the current cumulative ecological impacts of climate change and other stressors and on the salmon populations. And then we wanted to create an assessment and decision-making framework, right? A tool basically that is, GIS enhanced, aiming to have an effective utilization for people that deal with in-stream barriers. And really, we're talking about river management people and other stakeholders that are interested in helping to deal with the problem and of potential barriers on salmon rivers. So we need a tool, and the barrier assessment model and framework needs to take into account the cumulative effects as well as a prioritizing of the ecosystem function. It would help highlight impacted areas, identify those barriers that are really in trouble, help show where the greatest increase in ecosystem health could be realized. And really, it's a starting point, right? We need somewhere where managers could start. And in the time where we have restrictive budgets for dealing with some of this stuff, you want to start at the worst problems to get fixed, and not just in a visually oriented area and fix a few that you've seen. And some of that is not the best way to get the best bang for your buck, so to speak. So our tool, we started the River Restoration and Planning Analysis tool, and it's a tool for managing rivers. And really, it's a policy framework providing a structured approach for river rehabilitation, examining multiple spatial and temporal scales. Our approach provides guidance really for decision-making management that uses integrated design with a background in basically structured design, as well as something called geodesign. So structured processing with geodesign. And these are important because you need to form a representation of what you're looking at and have it, all understood before you can make the best decisions you can about which barriers you're going to deal with in a priority. So our applied action tool would bring analysis and situation understanding directly for management to deal with. It's almost like a guidance system so that they can make the best decision on potential barriers that they can make. And we've already published on this tool, so if you want, we can look that up and see the publication on the main approach, River Restoration and Planning Analysis tool. It's a really good guide, and we've spent some time building that and developing it to be what it is for good river management. Now, a part of that approach, we've also included some specialized tooling that'll help do some of the work for potential barriers. One of those was called the Dendritic Connectivity Assessment Tool, or the DCAT for short. And really, it's a dynamic connectivity assessment tool for use on watershed systems. And it's a GIS-built tool that uses Python coding that was created for it, and it's capable of river analysis, which if you know GIS a little bit, you could go zoom in and out, and it's multiple scale ability. So when we built the tool, we wanted to be able to deal with multiple scales as well, from large regions right into just single watersheds if we have to. So it's watershed connectivity modeling combined with an effective evaluation approach. And we wanted our results of that to be both measurable and multiple oriented. In other words, be able to have multiple solutions that decision makers can weigh one to another and pick what is best. So we built the DCAT tool, and it built in a couple of ways to look at potential barriers in the river system. We did it to look at barrier pathways from one branch to another branch of a watershed system, or you can look up and down in a single line from maybe the mouth of the river right up to the very top. So there's a couple of ways for the modeling. And our latest go at including something useful for DCAT was to create a production modeling analysis. And the production modeling is it's a way to look at what areas of the river, including the habitat especially, would be most beneficial to repair based on what kind of support it would give to salmon for production. These tools, of course, are utilizing a cumulative effects approach, which is important for watersheds because each barrier adds a cumulative impact, basically, for the migration of salmon. So continuing, our first case study we did, we applied the DCAT tool to a river system, the River Derwent over in the United Kingdom. And that system, pictured here in the diagram below and shows where it is. But it had multiple potential barriers with significant impact on the ability for fish to migrate and accessibility for humans to the areas as well. So for this analysis, we used DCAT's primary connectivity modeling tool, and we tested that for the first case study in several ways. We used branch to branch, as I described, and then we also used an inline study. So both of these, when we did the study, showed solutions for ways that the systems could be improved in terms of connectivity by selecting the most appropriate barriers that could be targeted for repair. So the idea here was to figure out which barriers to go after the strongest for restoration so that the whole system would be better in terms of connectivity. And the DCAT tool does that very nicely, has a solutions-oriented tool, but it does something a little bit different. So it'll do it and provide a primary solution that's the greatest increase to connectivity, but it also provides other solutions. So it gives you alternatives, which as a part of the RPAT approach is very, very important. So, you know, because the reality for decision makers around the table is that you might come up with the primary solution, and it'll be looked at and studied, and the thoughts around the table might be, well, for this and this reason or whatever, they might not be the primary candidates that can be tackled. So you want to have alternative potential barrier solutions that could be still targeted for a restoration project that will still provide value in restorative actions without having to cancel the project outright. So anyway, this is case study one, under the DCAT tool is also published now from 2023, and I recommend you have a look at that to see what we did there closely. So we did both primary sets and alternatives, which was helpful to providing context for solutions that could be examined further around a table of a panel of experts to see what would be the best way to the best solution to try to put in place. And theoretically, it's all theoretical for the publication, but being able to show which barriers should be tackled first is quite useful when you think about the multitude of potential barriers that exist on a river, where you might not be sure visually or by just walking up a river system which ones would be more important for the connectivity compared to other ones. In summary, for the case study one, DCAT tool can analyze multiple barriers. It calculates the best possible restorative choices along with the alternatives. And it's really like, for a management tool, it's a scientific guidance to them for making critical decisions. So next, we also did a case study two. And case study two for our project concentrated on the island of Newfoundland, which is my home province in Canada. And for the island of Newfoundland, we decided to use the entire island, which has quite a lot of potential barriers. There's a picture on the bottom left here, and each red dot you're looking at is actually a potential barrier. It doesn't mean they're all barriers, of course, but it is a potential barrier linked with a portion of the river at that point as well. So the second case study, looking at multiple barriers for Newfoundland, was an important one, and one that's close to my heart as a resident of Newfoundland. In this analysis, we developed a watershed salmon production model. So this is the production model I was referring to earlier. And it accounts for the crucial habitat for salmon, and it does so by examining what habitat areas would provide the greatest increase to production for by applying a restorative decisions to the barriers at those sections of or segments of the river. And really, the model examines connectivity intervention scenarios to uncover those solutions pathways, as well as the alternatives again, which was important for production capacity enhancement. Our aim again was to basically provide a guide or to help prioritize potential barrier restoration targets for the island of Newfoundland. This island-wide assessment takes a look basically at climate change as well, and the climate change projections for the island is something that I've been working on for a few years, really, as I did so at an academic level, and really extracted climate change mapping scenarios for temperature and precipitation for the province of Newfoundland, and by tying it into what's expected in terms of climate change and linking it to salmon as a health importance for them, it really showed something that's important to realize, and it really is to deal with the temperature and precipitation fluctuations that are expected to occur. So though the impending fluctuations are going to impact wild salmon populations on the island, if you only take a quick look at the diagram right here, you can see how the temperature is expected to rise quite dramatically under the scenarios of projected climate change. And that alone for the health of salmon is detrimental. It's not going to be good for them. So part of case study 2 was detailing that climate change, and we're doing that as an additional part that would fit in with our PAT approach, so that examining climate change maybe in combination with connectivity scenarios is a way that around a table where our PAT is designed to work, decision makers would be able to make a more informed, better or prioritized decisions for which potential barriers to restore. Really, the target is to maximize the intervention effectiveness by doing all that work, of course. And our publication for this is coming soon. It's something that we're working on right now, and it's hopefully this year. The DCAT tool, which has both sub-calculations basically in it, the connectivity stuff, as well as now the production modeling stuff. The DCAT it's good for support to managers, and it's going to make decisions around the table by the experts, I think, a little bit more guided in what they need to be doing to figure out which barriers to target for the best bang for their buck, to use those words again. But we need to help improve restoration effectiveness because we have challenging budgets, and if we can't fix every single barrier that's out there, we needed a way that will fix the ones that are that have the greatest impact and the greatest impact of our work towards the best connectivity for the system. And really, they help improve salmon populations. It brings them health to have more areas, more habitat, and less impedance to be coming up the rivers and spawning. Anyway, in summary, for the river restoration planning analysis tool, it is a comprehensive design for understanding process connections to the aquatic habitat. It's purpose-built and very versatile modeling. So, even with DCAT now and 2 sub-calculations added, there's room for more. And the RRPAT approach is a strong approach. And we've designed 2 different calculations to go into it that can help decision-making for sure. It's a multiple scenario solutions generator. And that's one of the keys behind the RRPAT approach DCAT tool, is that it uses some statistical solution code that will help, you know, list out different scenarios basically for teams of experts to really evaluate as potentials for making inroads and deciding which ones to really tackle to have the best result. It strengthens the decision confidence for the river management team and for the people that also see what they're doing and would use the rivers and see the good works that is the outcome of that. You know, this as a tool, it's a great thing, but going forward, really our PAD approach, it's a strong basis for further collaborative research and design, really. So with the abilities built into our patch, and the DCAT tool is, you know, customizable and expandable, then it opens up opportunities for doing even more with it. That could be maybe getting into risk analysis stuff, some additional social ecological process expansion. For example, figuring out distances from certain communities as a part of the evaluation of what barriers to tackle, and other cost measures might be something else to include. You can have additional evaluative indices such as risk and fragility indice might be a part of what to look at. So there's different ways that'll you know, form some beneficial ways to continue doing this work. And also, you know, one of the things that we found through looking at 2 case studies was the amount of data that's there in different watersheds around the world is different in each case. So some may have a lot of data you can study for an area, but other areas do not have enough data yet. And it's always important to have good data, and we find that data collection and use is something that you need to consider each time you're in an area. And the more data you have, perhaps, you know, you can make better informed decisions because you can use the data in different ways. So just an extra note on that. I want to say thank you to my project partners and sponsorship for this, and allowing me to have your time as well. And thank you for that. I think I'll tie it up there and go into perhaps some questions. I don't know if I'm early or a bit long or not, but anyway, I've had a quick discussion with you, and I'm ready for some questions. There's my contact info if you need it for writing something down to send me later as well.
Thank you so much, Myron. That was an excellent presentation. We'll now open the floor for questions. You can type in your questions and I will read them out loud for Myron. Or if you want to ask your own question, please just raise the little hand and I'll unmute you so you can speak with him yourself. So I'll just wait and see now if we have some questions. Okay, we have a question here from Frank Myron. He's going to speak with you himself. Frank, I believe you have to unmute your microphone from your end. Okay, there we go.
No.
Hello.
This is extremely interesting. Would your measure of connectivity or the lack of it extrapolate to being a measure of, let's say, watershed health, or view negatively a measure of stress on a watershed, or is that that would be an assumption?
Thanks for your question, Frank. So I think what really goes on there is we're using a connectivity model that was developed with the health of the systems in place previously as well. We were able to take something that was developed as an index, basically, of health by looking at the connectivity. So connectivity itself is well known as a watershed aspect, where the greater the connectivity, the better the health of the salmon in the rivers would be. And the reality is a better connected watershed is healthier for salmon because it opens up greater amounts of areas of spawning habitat and more areas that could be pursued through the migration process for salmon, things like this. And so the higher the connectivity, the better it is for the fish. So the index, which was created by Cote and his associates at the time that we followed for part of our modeling approach, really the index rates the connectivity of the system and provides a measurable number to state about the health of the system. So, you know, by taking his result as an index and using it, but enhancing it with statistical approaches for connectivity, really we're creating a way to do mass amounts of connectivity assessments under the pressure or under the question of which barriers and how many barriers to fix to create the conditions that are better for salmon, right? So connectivity in that way is very measurable and definitely related to the health of the watershed. And then by linking that, of course, health of the salmon that migrate up the watershed. I hope that helps as an answer for your question.
So if naively, if there was a reduction in connectivity, I could assume that there are loads of roads with culverts, and there might be effect on the hydrology within the watershed, a negative one.
It would be negative impacting for sure. So the connectivity, it'll come out as a high index number when a system is more connected, and more connected would mean the lack or less numbers of barriers, which is really how fragmented the system is, right?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I have a couple of written questions here we'll address, and then I see there's another hand up as well. The first one is from Aaron. He wants to know if DCAT is available for folks to use, and if not, will it be nicely packaged so it can be someday?
We've been thinking about that. So, I mean, right now it's within customizing programmable support state where, you know, it might be usable in collaboration with groups through our team. Is not available publicly for coding yet, but it's something we have been considering. Yeah, I don't know if it will be at this time or down the road for sure, but it's something we're considering. Right now, for using the code to apply to a variety of watersheds outside of what we've been doing so far, we'd asked the interested parties to just give us a communication and see where that can go. Maybe some collaborative abilities there, but it's not currently available. The ability to package it and provide it as a download perhaps in the future is not ruled out. It would take some additional programming and steps to make it available that way. Plus, it would always, I think, need a little bit of tweaking and ability to package it or, fit it to the intricate layers or instances that are involved for the team that's interested, right? So we took it and we've created it and applied it to the situations that we did for our case study, and we can adapt it very easy to other ones, but it needs the I'll say the words babysitting to make it work properly, and that's where I think we could use a bit more development, but maybe down the road it might be. Thank you for your question.
Okay. All right, the next question I will read as well is from Laurel, and it says, thank you, Myron, great tool and presentation. I was wondering how this tool could be shared with small watershed groups in the future and how accessible it is to use at a small watershed scale.
Thanks for your question. So, it's fit to different scales. So as you've seen in the case study, I've applied it now fairly successfully with scenarios to a small watershed. And I mean, just for a little context on the size of that watershed, I'll show you. There's the watershed that initially we applied it to, which is one in the United Kingdom. I mean, it's not super small, but DCAT could be applied to even smaller than this, one river with several barriers. But the strength of DCAT is in using, for something that would take maybe a lot longer to do by hand or to figure out with something similar. It takes some of these very difficult calculations and does them quickly, and that's the reason why it's helpful for something like that. But and then I've taken it as well and applied it at a region by region basis for the entire province or island of Newfoundland. So it's scalable, and that's really good for the tool in terms of purpose going forward. Now, as I said previously, I think in order to be usable strongly for like a conservation group or something, it would be best to be as a collaborative approach with our team at this point. So I'd recommend, again, making a communication to myself or even Dr. Van Zildejong to feel out that idea and see if there's something that can be done, or scope it out if possible. It might be available in the future, but right now we're just presenting and showing what this is capable of with the tools that are in place, as it's almost full development and project is soon coming to a close, hopefully. So thank you for your question.
Okay, the next question is from Nathan. Nathan, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Excellent presentation, Myron. Very practical and relevant. Couple of questions for you. In your map of the island of Newfoundland, you were calling the potential barriers, and there's quite a big distinction between a barrier and a potential barrier. And I'm wondering, were you just overlaying the road network on the hydrographic network and calling those intersections potential barriers, or if not, how are you making that step between potential barrier and calling it a barrier?
Yeah, okay. So thanks for your question, Nathan. There's a couple important steps that are done to further discriminate the difference between what might be okay, in the real world versus what is a barrier. And, from the outset, you have to call all of them potential barriers, because we're not going out and ground truthing them to make a ground truth understanding of what is definitely a barrier or not. So once you figure out the points of intersections, each one is a potential barrier, only to be ruled out if you visit it. But from a GIS study perspective, there's a few other things you can do, with digital elevation models and so forth, to examine some of the aspects of the surrounding area within that barrier neighborhood, and those are what we use to discriminate a little bit better with some of the previous studies and understanding of what could constitute a barrier, particularly for salmon that need to swim up the rivers and get into the spawning habitat. So some of those things that'll be covered in the that'll be covered a bit better in the publication, of course, that's forthcoming basically almost at this point. But it's a good question, because there is an important difference between what you would come up with just by overlaying and seeing where the points of intersection are versus what is actually a little bit closer understanding theoretically to what is more probable a barrier rather than not, right? So it's a good question, and thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And I do have a quick second question, if I may. Are you familiar with the Canadian Wildlife Federation's fish passage connectivity work? Because they're doing almost exactly the same thing in Canada, across Canada, and I'm just curious if you were familiar with that, because there's very close crossover.
Well, I mean, that's good, right? So different collaborations could be, sought after or done based on different people going after the issue here. The end goal is to help out the salmon and make sure they get up the rivers. But I become familiar with the CWF's work a little bit. I haven't talked to anybody, but it's on the burner basically for us that we're aware, and we might have some discussions with some of those folks to see where they are. Now, I mean, we've been doing our work it's a part of my PhD project. So I've been working on this with the outputs that we've created and under my supervisors for a few years, 6 years now. Right, so I'm at the end nearly of my PhD and getting through the process here, but we have some good outputs and look forward to further collaboration with teams like the CWF to make sure that watersheds in Canada and beyond are getting what they need for conservation efforts.
Great, good work.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple more written questions here. The first one is from Laurel, and she's asking, could this tool also include the presence of aquatic invasive species?
I mean, that's a good question. So it's built to the DCAT tool I'll talk about initially here. It's built to examine barriers explicitly, but as a part of viewing which barriers that need restoration, the building, the consideration of additional aspects are brought into the case for a final solution filtering, basically, is what it comes down to. And the presence of aquatic invasive species could be represented in code in a certain way that will allow you to, say, increase or decrease the resulting combination outputs for the tool. And in that way, you would be taking into account aquatic invasive species. Now, how to make those calls for what value is added or decreased for an aquatic invasive species rating, that's where you would have to do more of the footwork to see how to rate it, right? So if you had many different barriers where you have a known aquatic invasive species presence, and you could somehow create a gauging of those species. Say, I mean, even it might even be something as simple as rating them 1 out of 10 for, aquatic invasive species presence. And if you did that at every single site that's important for where there are potential barriers and or rating, or within the segment between potential barriers, right? So the segment of rivers where you might be making your inference for AVSs, and I mean, doing so would then help you create a way to gauge the effort, right? Does that help? I hope so.
Okay, and the next question, it's the last one I have so far. Is this tool similar to the Nature Conservancy of Canada barrier prioritization tool?
That I'm not sure of. So I haven't studied their tool very much. If you had a bit more information about what they're doing in their assessment or their solutions tool for that. Ours looks at a couple of calculations and rates basically a prioritization model for which barriers, if restored, and different combinations. So you might look at 2 for that, or you might look at groups of 4 barriers or 5, but it rates them based on which ones would provide the best bang for your buck in restoration. So if you're looking at groups of 4 across a 30 barrier site or region, and you want to fix 4 for sure, and you want to fix 4, well, how are you going to pick the top 4? Well, that's what our tool is created to do, at least the first calculation. The second one will allow you to do a second scenario, looking at the same region and picking based on the production areas that are uncovered through restoration of those barriers, and then rating which barriers to unleash. So both calculation methods are a little bit similar to each other, although different in what their primary focus is for the resulting output. So if that's like what they're doing, I'm unsure. There's a few different tools that do different things. Some of them did not or do not include habitat as a part of their technique to examine it. So it depends on what they're looking at, really. So that's all I can really say about it.
Okay, we do have another question now. This is from Bruce, and he's asking, is there a way to include the difficulty, for example, the cost of restoring passage at particular sites?
Thank you for your question. That is not built in currently, but yeah, I mean, we've considered that, and we've talked about it as a potential. There's definitely ways to add it. When you're working with Python to program a tool, you can almost think of anything under the sun that can be added. The reality is, if you figure out a way that you want to control or describe the budget amount that is costing per barrier, and I'll go back to the aquatic invasive species example, is that you need a way to be able to rate what the value of that variable would be at a barrier level or at each barrier. And once you could do that, and you can with costing, so as a budget perspective, if you had somebody that examined all 20 barriers in a region and the cost of each one was known, this is going to cost this much, this is going to cost this much, you could build that into Python fairly easy to evaluate as a part of combination with your current calculation, really, to include it as a part of the criteria. And right off the top of my head, I mean, as an example for doing that, you might consider something like, well, I know as a foundational, what if every barrier costs $5,000 to fix? And that's dream world now, I know, but if you had that amount and it costs the same for each one of them, or there's a couple of different costs within each one, then if you're going to pick the best 4, the reality is, I guess, if they all cost the same, it won't play into it because you know how much you're going to pay. But if you knew what each one costs and there's some variance in what each one costs, then you may want to add the rule that you only want to spend $12,000, and so which 3 are going to get you to that point and still be the highest on the prioritization list. So you would link them together then. So it is possible, but it's not done in our tool yet. So that's one of the ideas for could the tool be expanded to do a bit more through its custom built way? Absolutely, it could.
Okay. So does anybody else have any further questions? Okay, that seems to be the end of the questions so far. If you do have more questions later, please feel free to send me an email or Charlene, and we will pass that on to Myron. We've recorded the session and it will be available on our YouTube page. I would like to remind everyone that our next webinar will be on February 28th with Antoine Gagnon-Poiré from FCAS-FCSA presenting. So a big thank you again to Myron and to all of you who participated. We hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.